Eric Schmidt is a techno-optimist. He can see a world with a driverless car, hologram communications, and robots replacing us humans in events which we cannot attend. He's a graduate of Princeton and Berkeley University. He served on the research staff of the famous Xerox lab in Palo Alto and became one of America's most well-respected executives before joining Larry Page and Sergey Brin at Google in 2001. Eric was Google's CEO for a decade, signing on milestones such as Google Maps, Gmail, YouTube, Google Chrome, and the Android mobile phone. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure and a distinct honor to have here with us the chairman of Google, Mr. Eric Schmidt.
I think you should have let that panel go for another hour. They were having such a good time.
If it was only that we knew that you have the time. Mr.
Anyway,
Schmidt.
to clear, thank you very, very much for having me.
It is great to have you with us, and we are very honored to have you in Israel for the first time. You know, it is the moment before something new is born, which I want to explore with you, before we speak about anything else. Pick an example, if you will, and tell me about the thrill and the excitement, but also the fear of an innovation.
There are many examples. You mentioned Gmail. We introduced Gmail on April 1st, which is April Fool's Day, 2004, because we weren't quite sure how well it would do, but we had invented a new way of making applications using something called a LAMP stack inside of the existing browsers. And no one had made such a powerful client app that was distributed from the server. I don't think any of us understood the scale to which Gmail would operate. I remember the first time that I saw Google Earth, and I thought, wow, this is extraordinary. But I didn't understand that when we did the same thing with maps, using similar but not the same technology embedded in a browser, it would completely change the notion of geolocation. So those are two. And I think it'd be fair to say that no one understood the societal impact that video would have in the YouTube case. Certainly when we acquired YouTube, we did our own video. We figured that these videos would be the entertaining videos that were then on the web. It did not occur to us that video was so powerful that YouTube could ultimately rival and eventually be larger than in audience anyway, in traditional broadcast video. And in fact is a source for broadcast video for the kind of material which they show on regular television. None of us foresaw that.
Which means that conceptually it is truly impossible to foresee in any shape, way, or form how our world, how our internet will look like in a year or 5 years from now.
There are things that we know and things that we don't know.
Like?
The things that we know are technological extrapolations of technological trends. Let me give you an example. In general, we're governed by a principle called Moore's Law. I think people here know what Moore's Law is, but it's roughly speaking that the density or power, if you will, of semiconductors roughly doubles every 2 years. There are some people who believe that that rate is slowing down. It's controversial, but it's been true since roughly 1965, which is an amazing rule. Everything you see here in the high-tech miracle that is Israel can be understood as not due to Israel and your hard work, but to an underlying law that enabled it. That Moore's Law created the platform that you have invented these amazing things on. Moore's Law is likely to continue for another decade. There are estimates that it might occur for another couple decades. So a simple mathematical extrapolation says that, roughly speaking, over a 5-year period, things are, 10 times faster? You do the math, and you get the idea. So we can estimate those. So things which were ideas 10 years ago are commercially expensive today, and they're ubiquitous in 5 or 10 years. A typical example would be mobile devices. I have my Android phone. It
is not going to be an iPhone.
No, of course not. This is my Android phone. It's a Nexus S. So this device is some number of hundreds of dollars, perhaps $400 or $500. I think they're more expensive here for God knows what reason.
Not only God, the cellular companies do as
Yeah, there
well.
must be some reason. So this device will fall in price over, say, until 2025, maybe from $400 to $20. So as the prices fall, think about the implications of that. People are using cameras right now. Those cameras have computational power far greater than the computers that I used when I was in graduate school in computer science, and they cost $5 or $10 million.
But is it only that we're going to have more rapid gadgets or cheaper ones, or we're going to have a whole new world in front of us?
Well, what happens is, what do we do with it as computer science? One of the interesting things about Israel is that the Israeli military does a lot of data analytics and a lot of large data aggregation of sources, signaling, that sort of stuff. So there's a whole generation of computer scientists here in Israel who understand how to take large, discontinuous data sets and derive interesting results from them. There are whole industries being built on so-called cloud computing using data analytics from data that's produced in real time. I have no idea what these industries will do, but I'm quite convinced that a new industry is being built right here in Israel to use that technology. And so we can say that the technology will create an opportunity. We cannot necessarily predict what we'll do.
And you certainly gave me an answer.
There's one other thing I would say is that we know that connectivity is increasing rapidly, and it's essentially a global right. The rough numbers are that there are on the order of 1 billion smartphones. There are on the order of 2.3 billion computer connections, internet connections, and they're on the order of 5 billion mobile phones. So the phones that are dumb phones, that is SMS-capable phones, will all be upgraded to these smartphones, and as that upgrade occurs, there will be a revolution in information, in entertainment, and we take it for granted here in Israel because we have such good technology. But we were just in Afghanistan and Pakistan, countries that you wouldn't normally visit. And all of a sudden, when these devices show up in a village there, it's life-changing. From literally no information to all information. No entertainment, all entertainment. I personally have no idea what will happen when that occurs, but I know it will happen.
And modestly enough, you tell me there are things that we do not know. We do not know where this brave new world is leading us. And I wonder on a personal level, and this is truly a personal question, are there moments in which it dawns on you that perhaps Eric, the baby boomer, born in another century, in another age, will find it difficult eventually to compete with these smart guys born digital?
Well, that's already true.
Tell me, when do you feel it?
Well, as a programmer, they're going to be much better programmers than I am now, although I would claim I was pretty good when I was 20. But the difference now is that there's so much more information to master. One of the things that's occurred in science and humanities in these fields is they become very, very deeply complex. And so the ability to master them is a huge challenge for our younger generation. The Minister's speech on education was important because Israel has a strong commitment to education, a strong university system, and I think it's very important that that be strengthened to continue to keep the country, your businesses competitive. I feel the same way about the United States.
And when you spend time with these guys at Google, the young engineers, the young computer science, where do you feel that they are different than you? In the way they see life, in the way they perceive?
The biggest change generationally is that people work in teams now. There are sort of two changes. This generation, because they've grown up digitally, take it for granted in a way that it's hard to describe. Typical example is an employee will come in and say, oh, I have a terabyte on this hard drive. And I said, do you have any idea how big a terabyte is? Right. I can tell you physically how big a terabyte is. I can also, and not only is there no recognition of it, there's also no credit for the work that we did.
Why should there?
I still enjoy landing at an airport and discovering that the internet works in that country. To me, that's still a great joy. And for this generation, oh yeah, it's always been that true. Of course, we forget. And I think we were talking today at Google. that today it's possible for an executive like myself to travel around the world, stay connected, and aside from time zones, right, the internet works everywhere, you can get connected, you carry your computer, I use a Mac rather than a PC, and off we go.
And you made it a point to address this young generation just a couple of weeks ago in a commencement speech that you gave in BU in Boston University, and you found it important to tell them that they are the first fully connected generation, but also you had an advice for them. You said you cannot let technology rule you, and you asked them, take 1 hour a day and put it off, the machine, the smartphone, the computer. Take 1 hour a day and turn that thing off. Take your eyes off that screen and look into the eyes of the person you love. Have a conversation, a real conversation. And I was wondering...
And at the end, I then said, and then turn it right back on.
And while you were saying...
Only 1 hour, guys.
And that was my next question. But while you were saying it, you know that the camera was picking on a female student texting in her smartphone. And, you know, for her, why was it so important for you to tell them that?
What you learn in life as you get older is that what matters is who you travel with, not what you do. So I've been fortunate that in my career I met extremely smart people, and that some of us were successful. There's nothing that I did by myself. And what I learned was that, and my advice to everyone, is it's who you live with, who you work with, who you have fun with. It's about people. And people is not the same thing as texting them all the time. Now, and I suggest a modest budget of 15 hours online and 1 hour with people.
Do you implement it?
Yes, of course. I turn off my Android phone, my other devices at dinner time. Because dinner, if you look at societal structure, dinner was always where, in every society, where family lessons were passed down, oral traditions were passed down. This is a human thing.
And that brings me to the question which we are dealing with in this big tent, and that's the connection or the correlation between information, progress, technology, and freedom. Is there necessarily a connection? These guys that you met in BU, they are much more knowledgeable than I guess your peers were at their age. They know more, they can get much more information. Are they more free?
Well, it depends on whether they work and live in a country that is free information or not. One of the problems with censorship is that you don't know what you don't know. You always have to suspect there's some fact or some piece of opinion that you're not being given because you don't deserve to know. That's a terrible way to live. It makes you paranoid. It makes you feel that you're not fully human. We take the view that you as an individual should be given all the information, and then you should make your decision. That you should be skeptical of the information that you find. You should be skeptical of what people say, including what I say, by the way. But the important thing is you should make up your own opinion, and that you have to have all the information to make that decision. We argue, furthermore, that countries that implement censorship, or balkanized internets, URL filtering, content filtering, and so forth, will ultimately not be as competitive because the nature of critical thought, the motion of society, entertainment, new businesses, really requires seeing everything, so then you can make an informed decision about how you spend your time.
In that sense, Mr. Schmidt, and that's going to be a direct question, do you regret engaging the Chinese government instead of breaking away the moment they applied censorship on your search results?
Since I was the architect of it, I'll give you a direct answer. We believed that the best strategy was to enter China and to, working with the citizens who are good people, show them the value of openness, and that internal pressure from within China would curtail the misbehavior of the Chinese government. That was our opinion, and I promoted this view. After 5 years, I can tell you that our strategy did not work, but we did try. After 5 years, and to this day today, censorship has gotten significantly worse in China. Censorship at the blogger level, censorship at the Gmail or equivalent level. And in fact, the Chinese have built a surveillance society with very aggressive proxy caches, ways of disconnecting connection and omitting information. They've done so because they can, not because it's the right answer for their society. So we are strongly in favor of China opening up that policy. What we did is we moved to Hong Kong, and there's a firewall, which is known as the Great Firewall, which exists between Hong Kong and the mainland, and China attempts to implement the censorship that way.
I know you've been honest with me so far, but I will appreciate honesty in the next response as well. Is there a lesson that you learned in terms of image, in terms of taking some blows, in terms of Google being painted in colors that it wasn't used to?
But I think you're completely misreading the benefit of this. If you don't try, you don't know. We honestly tried, and it honestly did not work. But in hindsight, we did everything we could think of at the time to effectuate an opening of the strategy. It just didn't work. Now, I think one of the characteristics of Israel and one of the characteristics of the startups that I've met with today is this notion of keeping trying and so forth. Society moves forward by trying things, failing, apologizing, trying again, and so forth. It's the secret of innovation. Google is full of things that we've tried, and the good news is most of the products that have failed, I've forgotten their names. Right? We celebrate Gmail and Maps and Search and Android. Unbelievable. Chrome. Do you realize that Chrome is now doing better on a market share basis than Internet Explorer?
It is better, I can testify.
It is, and furthermore,
just
not only do you, an ad for Chrome for a sec. If you care about security, use Chrome. If you care about speed, use Chrome. And if you care about society, all your friends are using Chrome. So use Chrome. Right? So
this was easy, and
and furthermore, you agree. So therefore, the two of us must be correct.
In this case,
but my point is, we celebrate those wins, but there were an equivalent number of things which didn't work. But we had a quick way of saying, look, these were good ideas, but they weren't good enough, or we made an error, or the engineering team made an error, or that it was the wrong time of the market. We eliminated those. We took those engineers, by the way. We told them, thank you very much. You did a good job. And we put them on something that was going to win. And that's the secret to a successful high-tech company.
We spoke about China. I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about the Arab Spring. Those young protesters in Egypt and in Tunisia and later in Libya, I admit that we Israelis were very skeptic from the starters of this Arab Spring. But eventually, I guess many people in the world can see that not even one democracy was born in that Arab Spring. Can the internet truly inspire winds of freedom or just coordinate the protest?
So I've now visited Egypt, Libya, and Tunisia at various times, Libya and Tunisia most recently. And one way to understand the narrative is to understand that the dictators who ran those countries had a complete censorship strategy for everything except the internet, because they were too old.
Too old?
Too old. They were in their 70s and 80s. They didn't understand.
It was a mistake.
If you're a dictator. So I hope no one here wants to be a dictator, but in dictator lessons, right, you see why we think censorship is so bad. And the failure to censor and understand the consequences gave the people who were fighting for freedom for decades a tool that they did not have before. So the rebel leaders who now compose the government of Libya told us that they had been trying to overthrow Gaddafi for literally 10 years. There had been a series of attacks and attempts to overthrow this terrible government. And various people were killed and so forth, so they were wary. And then using the tools of the internet, they were able to do a simultaneous attack. It was the fact that they had real-time simultaneousness, whatever the word, whatever it is, to allow them to get the jump on the well-organized and overwhelming forces of the evil regime.
So now there's a...
And so that's what they said. I want to say one other thing about this.
Sure.
It is not the tech companies that made these revolutions happen. It is the sacrifice of the people who simply used tools that were available to them. The fight for freedom is led by people who are willing to take huge risks, including to their deaths, right? And unfortunately, we're seeing a repeat of this in Syria, where it's coming out the other way. But the fact of the matter is that societies have to exist at some level with the consent of the governed. And all of those countries failed for that reason. As to whether they will ultimately become Western-style democracies, I don't know. But what I do know is that what democracy couldn't achieve, an internet-powered revolution did achieve, which is the overthrow of a status quo that was not working.
And now there is a playbook for dictators such as Bashar al-Assad, who knows how to block YouTube and just arrest the bloggers?
Well, again, it's interesting that the data that we have assembled is that shutting down the internet is seen as a very drastic action. So if you lived in a dictatorship and you're trying to get through life and you use the internet every day, and there's this group over here that's demonstrating, well, there's always people who are unhappy. Well, if the government shuts down the internet, that's a signal to you that they're scared. So now you as an individual have a choice. You can choose with the government or you can choose with the rebels. An important decision and not one you'll make lightly.
Before we open up for questions from the audience, I read something very interesting which you said about old-time journalism and the sense of responsibility that you have, despite the fact that Google sees itself as trying to make the world a better place with more information. You say there are bloggers all over, but well-funded, targeted, professionally managed investigative journalism is a necessary precondition, you say, in my view, to a functioning democracy. Can it really?
Someone continues to break the glass.
Can it really happen in a world where Google is perceived to be sometimes a newspaper killer?
Well, we certainly do not wish to be a newspaper killer. I think that newspapers are incredibly important for many reasons, and newspapers will certainly survive, perhaps in different forms. There is a very serious loss underway, and that's a serious loss of the kind of goodwill that a newspaper did. They would spend money in an expeditionary way. They would say, perhaps there's a problem over here. Let's go investigate. Let's go really thoroughly research. And there simply is not enough money to do that. As a result, we're losing one of the most important voices, a professional investigative role that the newspaper and the publishing industry provides in a functioning democracy.
That will expose the Pentagon Papers.
Yes, although you could argue that Daniel Ellsberg with the Pentagon Papers would have simply put them to WikiLeaks.
Would he?
I don't know, he's no longer with us. But his political inclinations would have led me to believe that he would have been quite happy to do that. And remember that he was actually tried. The New York Times and he were tried over the leak. And in a complex decision, it was decided that it was actually okay. So his decision to release the Pentagon Papers, which altered the war in Vietnam, was a substantively courageous and or criminal decision, depending on your point of view in the United States.
But still, it is your argument that the New York Times can do things which no blogger can do.
I believe that there will always be trusted sources of information. Every society that I know, and I'm sure perhaps it's your organization, has spent decades developing the trust of its readers and its citizens. We have not yet seen such groups emerge purely on the internet, although there are some that are coming. For example, in America, I'm not as familiar with your market.
Post.
Well, let me give you a particular example. In Washington, a group called Politico exists. And Politico started off essentially as an online service, but it's run by people who are veteran journalists. And they are clearly proving an online model that generates revenue, and they're beginning to break stories. So I think there's reasons to think, Huffington Post as well, but let's use Politico. It's run by people from the older industry using newer tactics and newer revenue streams, and it appears to be doing very well. So I think that's a replicable model here as well.
We want to spare some time, Mr. Schmidt, to have several questions from the audience. So I would love to get some questions. Yes, please.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
Hi.
Let's see if we get the mic so that everybody can hear you.
Okay, my name is Nathan. Hi. First, Daniel Ellsberg is still alive. He just turned 82.
Okay.
And the other
Thank
thing
you for the
is, do
correction.
you imagine a situation where actually Google would do some of the stuff that WikiLeaks does?
Would
Be a
Google-
platform for people to reveal information? Because you know you have these periodic reports on government censorship. You just released the last one a few days ago. So you have an inclination.
We have a transparency inclination. We typically are not a content hoster. In the case of WikiLeaks, we were quite happy to link to it, which is sort of what we do, and then let people decide if they wanted to read the context or so forth. So when the WikiLeaks drama was unfolding, we saw no problem with our making that information available to readers, but I don't think that we would have wanted to be the hoster, because in general, we try not to host things. We view ourselves as unbiased with respect to ranking. And if we were to say, let me give you an example. Let's say there's a WikiLeaks and then there's a Google Leaks, and the two are competitive. And then if we rank them and we rank Google Leaks ahead of WikiLeaks, the user would say, well, maybe that's bias. So it's better that there's WikiLeaks 1 and WikiLeaks 2, which we can rank, which are both available to you using our algorithms, and then you can decide which you want to pursue.
Yes,
So
please.
the rough answer would be no.
Yes, please. Abdallah. You can put on your...
Perfect.
That's it.
Sorry. This is the one case where automatic translation would make a big difference.
My name is Abdallah. I belong to the education system. And as I've seen and heard today, everybody speaks about today. No one speaks about the future. And I, as an education person and as a father, I have a fear from the huge digital gap which is being created day after day and is growing. You spoke about the Terra, and there are people who are not with the beta, we're not with the byte even. And there are people who have not reached even the smallest thing. Will we have in the future two states within one state with such a huge social gap between the two, with technology having a negative impact on the new era? And as an education person, I really would like to hear from you about the future.
Tell you that Abdallah was just recently elected one of the excelling teachers in Israel, one of the best teachers in Israel.
My congratulations. I think.
גם ביקרתי בסטנפורד וממש רציתי לבקר בגוגל וביקרתי גם בסן פרנסיסקו וממש כדי לעמוד מקרוב על כל העשייה ולשאול את השאלות הללו שממש כל כך אכפת לי מהמדינה ואכפת לי מהדור החדש. במיוחד במגזר הערבי למשל.
So let me make a couple of observations about the future. First, I think the future is going to be better than it is today. And I think we should say that because people have worked themselves into such a state of depression about things. I think they're just wrong. Things are going to be much better because people will know more and will have better tools to educate and teach people in every language and in every society. I think that's point one. With respect to education, my personal view is that we're now finally going to see whether the traditional education versus online education versus other kinds of education that have not yet been invented work better because we're going to be able to measure them. We're going to actually know if it's better to watch videos or have a tremendous teacher like yourself stand at the equivalent of a blackboard in a classroom or whatever. And I think educators like yourself will encourage new tools because your goal is education. And you could teach, you're a good teacher, you can teach with anything. So I would argue that this next generation will be so conversant with phones and games and entertainment and entertainment and education combined that there will be a large number of new ways to learn math, to learn reading, and so forth, to learn history. I'm on the board of something called the Khan Academy, which is a very successful venture in the United States, which is beginning to be used here, that I would refer you to as an example.
Yes, Ido.
Hi. You were talking about censorship in China and about WikiLeaks. I was thinking, what if the United States government asked you to remove WikiLeaks from your search results because the law it can be interpreted as that they can remove it? And the bigger question is censorship worse? Not if censorship was worse. What do we do about the censorship, the gray censorship of technology? What isn't on Google, what I can't find on Google, does not exist.
So two separate questions. On the gray censorship, unfortunately, ranking requires making a choice. And if there's 1 million answers, we have to rank 1 from 1 million. And so the person who's 999,000 in the list does not feel heard. I don't know how to answer your question except to say that it's there, and we do our best effort at ranking. You asked the question about the US government and the WikiLeaks question. Let me give you a general answer and the specific answer. And I've learned with these kinds of answers to give a very precise one, because otherwise we get criticized. So pardon me as I take you through it. When you say government, are you referring to the legislative branch, the White House, the NSA, the CIA, or are you referring to a judicial system? If the answer is it's the government, the answer is no. If the answer is a judicial system with a proper search warrant, the answer is yes, because otherwise they can arrest us. It's called the law. And so we require a government request that comes to Google to be backed by a search warrant, by a legal process, and I believe you have similar processes here in Israel.
Would you go to court to fight it?
We have, and indeed, in a famous case that occurred in 2003, a federal prosecutor in a courtroom actually demanded and got an order to get very detailed search records. It was overbroad. And we successfully fought all the way to prevent the release of that information, and we did so successfully. So not only will we do what I said, we have done what we said. I should add that there is a law called the Patriot Act in America, and the Patriot Act can allow this process of judges to occur in secrecy, but it still requires the judges. Although President Bush disagreed with this a little bit, but under the current legal understanding of the Justice Department, the FISA courts require the full process. So I feel very strongly that we are doing the most we can to protect your information. With respect to, I'm sorry, I told you it was a long answer.
Go ahead.
With respect to WikiLeaks, there was no such request. If there had been such a request, we would have been very skeptical, and we would have certainly reviewed it very thoroughly, and it would have had to be, there was no such request. If there had been, it would have had the whole process of judges and a big review.
I'll try to make the question a little bit more difficult.
Than that one?
Suppose it's not a legal matter.
Yeah.
It's a matter of goodwill. You get a phone call from your good friend Barack Obama in the White House.
We already have an answer to that question.
And
The answer
I'll
is
just
no.
complete the question for the sake of our audience. And it tells
Because we're recording the answer.
and
Go ahead.
the question as well.
The president calls and says,
Eric, listen, there's this WikiLeaks coming up, secret conversations between American and Israeli senior officials. We don't need it out now. Please don't go to court. Please save us the embarrassment. Bear with me for this one.
if we were to say yes to that, we would be so eviscerated in reputation. Can you imagine? Because everything would come out eventually. I think it would, this is a hypothetical, but the answer is we have a policy, and our policy requires a court order. I'm very happy with that. So the answer, to be very precise, since you asked a very precise question, and here we are, and everybody likes precise answers, is we would say no after a nice long, long conversation.
Has the phone call ever arrived from the White House?
It has not.
It has not.
It has not, and that's important to know.
Yes, please. פשוט קרוב לפה.
שלום.
בעברית? אוקיי.
Hi, my name is Afik Klein. I'm 18 years old. I'm a senior in high school. I was in the Screensaver project, and I instructed students, adolescents, and kids regarding the dangers lurking in the network, and I'm certain that it helped some of them or most of them, and they did manage to avoid bullying on the network. And I wanted to know, what are your future plans regarding safety for adolescents?
First place, I'm very worried about this question, because it's very difficult to prove the age of a child. U.S. law, for example, does not allow use of websites below the age of 13, but a 10-year-old will forge their age, and it's very hard. They don't have driver's licenses, they don't have passports, can't ask their parents. You know, there are many reasons why it's very difficult. It's not a solved problem yet. I do believe that there's a problem in our technology, and I mean everyone's, not just Google, that the maturation of information in the internet is occurring faster than the maturation of the human being who's 13 or 14. And since we're not probably going to be able to get 13 and 14-year-olds to mature any quicker, every generation has tried to do that and failed. I think it's going to be a difficult problem for a long time.
The response that you gave reminds me of an old cartoon in the New Yorker many years ago. And you see two dogs talking to each other, and then it says, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. So, just one second. Yes?
Hi, good evening. My name is Jonathan Levy, and I'm from the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Labor here in Israel. We're very excited about your visit here.
Thank you.
I would like to ask you, how important is Israel for Google? How vital is it in your development, and what would be your future investments or activity? Are you looking at scouting new technologies, etc.? Thank you.
So we have a large engineering center in Tel Aviv and in Haifa. It's one of our most productive. The leader of it is in the front row. We reviewed it today. I would say it's certainly one of the top R&D centers in our company. You can tell that because we're growing it relatively dramatically. I'll let them describe their specific growth rates if they wish. Our sales teams here are among the most productive in the world, as measured on a revenue per salesperson. So we love Israel. We love it for the money we make and the products that are built. And I want to emphasize that the products that we build in Israel are worldwide products. We don't have Israel-only products. So, for example, Google Suggest is a very, very successful product, originated out of here. I should mention that everyone knows about the Dead Sea Scrolls project and the Holocaust Museum project. The idea of our entire strategy globally to preserve the knowledge of history, the pictures, so forth, came from a single individual here in Israel, a single Israeli engineer who in 20% time spent 2 years building a framework, and his management was smart enough to leave him alone, right, to build a framework that is now used for all the libraries, all of the art museums, all the pictures, everything. So I think it's an extraordinary accomplishment for Israel.
It's amazing.
You helped a little bit, so it's good.
And the future activity?
We will continue to expand. I wouldn't I wouldn't care to project, because we never know at Google, but the quality of the computer science engineers here are very, very good. I think partly because the universities are good, and frankly also because they all work in, I guess everybody here went into the military, women and the men, and the military, especially the kind of people we attract, have very, very good cyber intelligence skills, mathematical skills, signal intelligence skills. The things that militaries do at a technical level, we benefit from the training that the military does. And frankly, the employees are older. You know, they're a little mature. They're kind of very serious, very intense as a result of the training that they've received.
Member of Knesset Ronit Tirosh is the chairman of the Science and
you.
Technology Committee.
Yeah, but I would like to ask something from my former position as the Director General of the Ministry of Education, Culture and Sports, mentioning about investments and the digital gap. I would like to ask you about another kind of sense of digital gap. there is a big gap between the potential of the internet and Google as a source of knowledge and data and information, and the way that our teachers and of course our students use it. Does Google do anything to promote the ability of teachers in the world or in Israel in order to use it in a sophisticated way?
We do not yet do that ourselves. It's a very good question. We are funding a number of new education initiatives, millions of dollars around the world, to people who think they have a new way of doing secondary education or college-level education with more online tools. I think it's fair to say that we've not yet seen, and there may not exist, the silver bullet. There may not be one solution, but what we support is funding of research to come up with new ways that work where you can prove they work, that the outcomes are better. One of the comments would be that the technical world we're all talking about has changed enormously in a decade. Education has changed very little. Education should benefit from all the technological innovation. Mm-hmm. Again, your minister, whose support was very, very strong for this, has shown an example. There's a set of schools here in Israel where they've already converted to a new platform of online education, and they'll measure it and see what happens. We're scientists. Prove it to us.
Yes, please.
I wanted to ask about Google as content provider. You started as a search engine, and then you started to produce shows for YouTube, and also you started your own Wikipedia with Failed. What do you think about producing content, maybe buying a newspaper or starting to produce content as a website? Not only to linking to others?
I think it's unlikely we will do that. We have looked at this many times, and we think it's better that the newspapers all be indexed by Google, and we try to do our best in partnerships with newspapers to help them. But I think it's very unlikely we would buy a newspaper. It's very unlikely that we would do much of our own content. Content is really hard, and we have enough hard problems. I think we'd rather have you doing the content, and we'll be happy to index to you.
Yes, please. אתה רצית קודם.
Hi. Britain has recently reopened its investigation into the Street View affair, where Google has basically broke into unprotected Wi-Fi systems and taken information from them. About 2 years ago, you said that this was the initiative of a single employee, a single engineer. A recent FCC report said that several people of management ranking were aware of the affair. Do you think this affair damaged Google, and in what way do you think this could be avoided?
Let me just describe what happened, and then an engineer working in the Street View activities came up with a very clever way of figuring out where things were using Wi-Fi information, and when the cars were driving along, would capture some of the packets as the car drove along of open, that is non-password protected Wi-Fi networks. When we discovered that this had occurred, and I say we meaning the executives of the company, we took the hard drive, it fits on one hard drive, to be clear, and we put it in a vault and told the attorneys to notify the governments, because we suspected that it might be illegal, it might be against policy, certainly against Google policy. And we also announced that we had done this, it was a mistake, and we apologized. As far as I know, none of that information has ever been looked at, none of that information has ever been used by anyone for anything. About half the governments ordered us to destroy the information, we did, and half of them said you have to retain it in case we want to sue you, which we also retained. So we followed instructions. So I think that it's an embarrassment. As part of the testimony investigation, it was claimed that a couple of other people knew about it, but I can tell you that I was not aware of it, the people that I work with were not aware of it, and it's against Google policy, and it will certainly not recur.
We unfortunately have to wrap up this exciting encounter. With your permission, Mr. Schmidt, if we can take 2 minutes for a couple of short and quick questions. What's your main source of information personally?
I, of course, read newspapers.
What's your homepage?
Google. No, to be honest, I actually use Google News and regular newspapers, and I read the leading U.S. newspapers. The other thing that's interesting is that, like most people now, I get a lot of information from people emailing me, posting things on Google Plus and Facebook, and using Twitter.
Have you already come to terms with the fact that an iPad is more than simply a big iPhone?
Yeah, that's a little unfair.
Do you own one?
Do I own an iPad? Absolutely. I also own an Android tablet. My job is to understand all these products.
And you have the Nexus tablet.
Of course. Would you like to see it? No, this is the Nexus S. The core strategy that Apple has followed, which Google has also followed, is to have one operating system for the devices that are both phones and tablets. And the only difference is a difference in screen size. So in that sense, I was right.
You were right. And now I'll give you 3 terms, and you just go ahead with the first association you have.
I love these games.
They always work. Success.
I think ultimately success is designed by impact.
By the result.
Impact.
Privacy.
Privacy is something which we should be very concerned about.
And we learned how to be.
I'm waiting for your next word.
Google.
I hope Google has made your life better, and if it hasn't, we're not doing a good enough job. That's our goal.
And you're still shocked at the success, the impact?
Yeah, I continue to be shocked at the power of information. I've done this a long time, and every day I am always surprised at how important information is, how bright the future for information is, and how creative people are with it in a good way.
Was there one moment in the years you spent in Googleplex, one moment...
I'm still there.
I know. One moment which you can call the climax?
Oh, the future is just starting. It's important to understand that there's this tone that somehow we're just beginning, guys. We're just getting the basic programming of communications and information. These platforms are supercomputers masked as phones. This phone and the variants of it, and even, by the way, the iPhone, they have so much behind it. We have no idea what we'll be able to do with it. But I remain convinced that the computational power, the data analytics power of all those supercomputers, helping me play Angry Birds, it's phenomenal.
Mr. Schmidt, thank you so much.
Thank you all.